Welcome to ACOG's Video History. Our person to be interviewed today is Dr. Vivian Dickerson, the second female president of ACOG. Vivian, thank you for coming.
Thank you
for being here. Let's begin with some questions, a little bit about your background. Where were you originally born?
I was born in Grand Island, Nebraska. That's why I'm a Midwest girl.
Midwest. When did you first get to California?
My family moved in 1956, so I was still a child. And my father got a job with the government, and we moved and had no house, no anything. We just picked up and left. I think he was really tired of the snow was the reason we left.
And you've lived in California since that time?
My whole life, yes indeed.
So you're really a California girl transplanted from
yes,
the Midwest.
Right, but they're still, those roots run deep, so.
Let me ask you a question. I know that during your early life, you did work in the Peace Corps.
Mm-hmm.
Could you tell us a little bit about that experience?
Sure. I heard the first group of Peace Corps volunteers who came back after the Kennedy administration established the Peace Corps, and a couple of them came to my school and talked to us about their experience. And I was still fairly young, but at that moment I said, that's what I'm going to do when I'm finished with college. And I never changed my mind. And I went through college and wasn't really sure what I wanted to do with my life. And the Peace Corps recruiters came on campus. I said, I'm going. I knew I wanted to go to Africa. And little did I know that I was going to get involved in healthcare, though. I thought I'd be teaching school or something like that.
Tell us a little bit about your healthcare experience.
Well, what I did was they needed public health workers, basically. And so they gave us a fairly intensive training in the basics. I mean, the very, very basics: cover your food, wash your hands, those kinds of things. And so I went over and was in a little town all by myself, pretty much. I mean, in terms of no other volunteers there. And I went to the dispensaries and I taught, and I went to the outlying clinics and taught. And of course, I found myself very much interested in the pregnant women. And I saw my very first baby being born in a little mud hut about 3 o'clock in the morning in Africa. And I was terrified because I was sure I was going to pass out. I was absolutely positive, and instead I was just enthralled, and the midwife handed me the baby, and you know the rest. I mean, I was hooked.
And is that when you decided to become an obstetrician gynecologist?
It is. And I came home and suddenly remembered that I had a lot of work to do because I had majored in political science and music in college. I took one science class my entire 4 years, and that was geology, so it wasn't going to help me much getting into medical school. So I spent 2 intensive years doing all my pre-med.
Where were you in medical school?
I went to UC San Diego, and it was a fantastic program for me because it was very much involved in wedded with their basic science curricula, and I really needed as much of that as I could get because I kind of rushed through that pretty fast.
Now, as I recall, during this particular part of your life, you were also a fairly accomplished singer.
Well, yes, actually. I mean, I'm not sure about the accomplished part, but I dearly love to sing, and I had, as I said, been a music major in college, and so I couldn't quite let that go. And it was actually a very nice thing to be able to do, and stress reliever, and just something to get me away from it all. So I continued to sing, and actually still do.
Now, when you finished medical school, where did you decide to take your residency training?
I took my residency training at a UCLA program. UCLA had 3 programs at that time, one at their main campus, one at Harbor, and then one at Cedars-Sinai. And so I ended up at the one at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. And it was a great program.
Did you ever think about going on into further subspecialty training?
You know, I did, and I suppose if you ever look back with any regrets, there are times that is the one regret I would have, is that I didn't do that. But I also really knew I just wanted to take care of women. I was also a little bit older than everybody else, and by that time I'd had a baby, so I really was ready to have a job and move forward. So.
Now, in the group that you joined, and I obviously have the advantage of knowing And tell me a little bit about the mentorship that you had during that period of time.
It was a very exciting group to be in. Dr. Alfred Helfand, who was the leader of our group, it was me and 5 guys basically in this group, and Al was really an old-time doc. I mean, he'd made house calls, he'd done all these incredible things in his career, and pretty much had a one-man practice for many, many years. He was the guys who I had been working with, because he was pretty much retired, but he still came into the office, and the rest of the guys said, you know, Al has to want you in this practice. We've never had a woman, we're not sure how he's going to feel about that. And so when I first met him, we talked for about an hour, and he said, you know what, we've never had a woman. And I said, well, is that going to be a problem? He said, as long as you're the best, I don't care. And so that was that, and he and Phil Brooks both, who were very active in all the different societies and speaking and doing all those things, really helped me along and have been lifelong friends.
That was probably the first time that you broke down barriers. You've continued to do that. Tell me a little bit about your career after you left that program.
Well, I was in their office as a private physician for about a little over 10 years. And as I said, I'd always had this draw to academics, which was why there were times when I thought I should have done a subspecialty. But I got an opportunity to become the division director for general OBGYN at UC Irvine. And again, no other women division directors. And I thought, what a great opportunity to mentor and to be able to teach and be able to do some things that I want, and knowing that the residency population was rapidly changing and that there were more and more women going into OBGYN residencies. I just thought it was a marvelous opportunity, and so I took it.
When did you first get involved with the American College?
Well, ACOG, it's interesting. I was involved in the American Medical Student Association when I was in medical school, and I just really loved what associations and organizations like that can do, and how you can make an impact in a different way than practicing or teaching or whatever your daytime career is. And so when I got to residency, one of the guys said, gee, you know, we need somebody to be a section officer for the California section for the junior fellows. And I said, well, is that going to be a lot of work? And he said no. And I said, well, I'm just starting my residency. And he said, oh, no problem. Well, I think you probably know what happened. About 2 weeks later, California became a district instead of a section. So I went from being a section vice chair to a district vice chair of the junior fellows, and never looked back after that.
Let's review some of the positions you've held.
Oh,
I remember you as the district vice chair of the section, but you also then moved up into the regular district officership.
Right. Yeah, Ben Harrer was a very tremendous mentor for me in ACOG, as were you, as were a lot of people who encouraged me to stick with it and keep doing it. And so Ben, after I finished my junior fellowship, which is, as you well know, actually until your tenure, we kind of lost those people. We didn't have the young fellows. You finished your junior fellowship and you kind of fell off the cliff. But Ben was convinced that I could make a difference and had something to contribute. And so he actually created a position for me on the Fellows Council for the district. And then I moved up there and became vice chair and then chair. And then I became vice president of the college after that, and for 1 year. And then had a couple of years of giving it a try. We don't always get elected the first time we try. And then was elected president-elect in 2003 and took office in 2004. So.
Why did you want to be president of ACOG?
I thought well, there are a lot of reasons, Ralph. I thought it was important for women to represent the other women in the specialty. I still believe very strongly that it is important in organizations for the leadership to reflect the membership. And we'd had Teddy Klein in about 1984, I believe, and then we'd had Vicki Seltzer, and that had been many years. And so I really wanted to represent women. I wanted to show women that you can do it. I mean, I was a single mom for much of that time. I worked full time, and I still was able to find time to devote to the college, and I kind of wanted to be a role model in that way. I also very much wanted to bring forth my views and my feelings about the importance of advocacy and the role of ACOG in advocating, not only for our physicians, which is very important, but for the women of this world. And so it was an opportunity to express that, to share that, and to meet a lot of people.
Tell me a little bit about your presidency. What did you see as the highlight of your presidency of ACOG?
On a personal level, the highlight for me was the opportunity to go to all of the district meetings and really meet people. So often when you are in a leadership position, you tend to meet with the people who are in similar positions, or you meet with people who are in advisory councils. But by going to district meetings, you really got a chance to sit down with the fellows and talk about what do they want, what's important to them, why, what would they like you to do. And so that was a real pleasure and a real highlight for me. I think as I look at what we did during that time, I was very pleased that we were able to look at a strategic plan again and talk about some of the things that had changed, which really had something to do with we need to be more responsive and more supportive of our doctors. I think that was one of the things that came out as we did the strategic process. But a lot of reinforcement of our educational role. And I think we got some of our advocacy stuff in there too.
As I recall, you were the first president in almost recent memory that even considered strategic planning.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting. Well, you know, it's very important, and I think as well, it is extremely important that, and you and I had a lot of discussions about the importance. The strategic plan is one thing, but if it just sits on a shelf, it's meaningless. And so to make sure that it was out there and that it was operationalized, which is what you and your staff have done, I think is very important.
I think that was a highly successful part of your presidency. But I'd be interested to know, what was the most disappointing part of your pregnancy?
Disappointing. Well, you know, you always get waylaid by something. Every president for a number of years would say, wow, wasn't expecting that to come up, wasn't expecting that to happen. And the liability crisis kind of really hit its peak about the time I became president-elect. And by the time I was president, it was the thing. And we had to focus on that. And I'm not disappointed that I'm disappointed that we had to focus on it. I'm sorry that it's been such a problem. But it did not only make it hard to move forward on other agendas, it also put me personally in a very interesting situation, because the folks that I was dealing with on the Hill and the people that I was getting my picture taken with and doing TV spots with and, you know, arm in arm with were politicians who I had absolutely nothing else in common with except for the fact that they were helping us with liability. So it was an interesting problem, and I guess the real disappointment is that we weren't more successful in being able to advocate for tort reform for our fellows.
You've been around the college now in the most key positions in the college. If you could arbitrarily change ACOG, what would be the one major change you would see that we need to do?
Well, you just did one of them, so that's outstanding. And one of the things that we had been talking about from before my administration was increasing our ability to lobby and our ability to be available in different ways to our fellows. And certainly the C6, now that it has come to fruition and in place, I think has fulfilled that. I still would like to see, I think that the pathway, the road to leadership in ACOG is still very long, and it dissuades a lot of our really outstanding fellows, and I have to say probably even more dissuades our female fellows than our male fellows from achieving those roles. And I would very much like to see that even more streamlined than it is.
How would you suggest that we change it?
Well, I personally, and I've had a conversation, so I know it's not popular with all of our chairs, but I would very much like to not only see that our district chairmanships in that road are shorter. I don't think by the time you've been a secretary, a vice chair, and a chair, you spent 9 years just in your district, and before that you've probably spent at least that long in your section, and then you have to, you go through the process of becoming a national officer. I think you can shorten that, shorten the terms of office. I also think that we really have to give more than lip service to the fact that that still seems to be the major pathway. I think we have to find ways to cultivate our leaders and to allow them to demonstrate their leadership in other ways than just going through the section district place. I guess the other thing I'm really excited about that we did again and resurrected somewhat but changed very dramatically was the ACOG Leadership Institute. And we just had our 4th year. We have now had about 150 fellows that have gone through that, and junior fellows. And I always tell the story about how one of the things I learned from you very early on when you first became EVP was watching you in meetings. And there would be a young woman who would stand up and say something that was erudite and sounded, very passionate. And you immediately, you went up to her or him, you introduced yourself, you gave him your card, you said, we'd really like to have you involved. And that's really what it takes. We've done that in our district, and it's no accident that we've had 3 female district chairs out of the, I think, only 6 in the entire history of the college. I was the first female district chair ever at ACOG.
And also the first female chair of the district chairs.
Council of District Chairs, that's right. I didn't mention that. I'd forgotten about that. But yes, so I think actively pursuing leaders, training leaders, teaching leaders skills that will give them other pathways to be really involved on a front and center kind of basis with a college would be great.
Now, you've been in private practice.
Mm-hmm.
You've been in an academic center.
Mm-hmm.
You've seen the way our whole specialty now runs. What do you think the future of our specialty is?
Well, that's a really great question, especially right now with Mr. Obama in the White House. I think that there's a very strong future for OBGYN and for women's health care. I think that it is going to be very challenging. I am not sure what the political future holds, but I would imagine that we are going to see at least parts of our care become more of a nationalized kind of care plan. I think we're going to see that we're going to have our care and our reimbursement for care bundled with that of hospitals, which will be a wholly different relationship. But I also think that we really have a great opportunity because cycle of care is becoming the buzzword, and not just taking care of patients episodically, which a lot of specialties do. OBGYNs never have. We take care of these women through their whole lifespan, from the birth of their first child all the way through menopause and beyond. And so I think that what we know and what we do instinctively will really place us well as this cycle of care concept.
Are we training our young physicians for this type of a medical practice?
That's a good question, and my answer would be not nearly as well as we could. We still seem to be in many ways, and I think John Gibbons' task force has really demonstrated this to us a few years ago. In many ways, we're still doing the old kind of traditional episodic hospital-based care, and the afterthought is the ambulatory part and the really providing cycle of care reflective of the kind of practice you're going to have. We don't necessarily do that well. But I think a lot of people are aware of that now, and I get very enthusiastic when I see some of the changes that APCO and CREOG are talking about, and ways of training and ways of preparing docs for the real world.
If a young resident were to come to you today, or a young medical student, what would be your advice to them about how they should enter the specialty? What should they look forward to? Where should they be going?
Well, I still think very strongly, I don't regret for one day ever that I chose to be a physician, that I chose to be an OBGYN. I've loved every aspect of it. And I think that realistically, the specialty is going to change, but then realistically our young people today have changed too. They're looking at things in a little different way. I think they have a more balanced view of life, and they are looking for a balance. I think what they really have to understand is that you don't have to be the 24/7 in the hospital all the time kind of person in order to be a successful OBGYN, that you have multiple avenues and multiple ways to participate in the specialty, and you can choose. You can choose what you like, what you enjoy, and make it fit into your lifestyle and the rest of what's important to you.
Let's go back into your career then. You left the presidency and the past presidency of ACOG. Tell me, what has happened to your life since that time?
Well, I don't travel nearly as much. I spend a lot less time on airplanes, which is, coming from California that year, 250,000 miles I had just domestically in 1 year, which was a lot. But I got very intrigued with learning better leadership skills, with realizing, with understanding the administrative aspects of medicine, which was something I really didn't know much about. As you said, I'd done private practice, I'd done academia. And I was also very interested in trying to create a women's health program that, as you know, the only women's health programs in academia that are broader than just OBGYN tend to be run by internists. I didn't think that was such a great idea. I really thought we should be central to something like that. And so I really wanted to put together a broad-based program in academics. Unfortunately, our CEO at the time and our leadership at UC Irvine were not really interested. They just told me women's health really wasn't a priority for them. I think they were really very interested in becoming a tertiary care center. So one day I got a call from a gentleman who was CEO of a community hospital down the way, not-for-profit, and they had just built a 7-story women's pavilion. And they said, we just don't have a program, but if you'd like to create one and come and work for us, we would love it. And I thought about it for about 3 seconds and said, wow. So I went down, and I am now the executive medical director of women's health. And again, we're trying to integrate our programs. We're trying to not just see patients as they're a medicine patient or they're a cardiology patient or they're a GI surgery patient. We're really trying to look at the whole care perspective from the women's point of view. But I don't see patients anymore now. I actually am just doing administrative work, which is a challenge, but I'm learning a lot. And hopefully we're going to be successful in creating the kind of program that I think will be exemplary.
What are the major problems that you're facing in this multidisciplinary approach?
Well, you know, we doctors don't work so well together sometimes. The joke about herding cats, I think, is pretty based in reality. It's also very scary for physicians, I think, who've been doing things a certain way for a long time, to be asked to kind of expand their horizons, particularly as their reimbursements are going down, as they don't exactly know what the future is going to bring. So I find that docs kind of wonder what I'm doing to them instead of what we're doing together. It's difficult for them to see the picture, the big picture. They're really very focused on their day-to-day patient care. So that's a challenge. We're very lucky. We're a very well-endowed hospital. And so we certainly have the wherewithal to create some of these programs.
If you could go out on your own today with all the money you would ever need and develop a program, how would you do it? Well,
that's a good question. I think you need what we don't have where I am now, and I think what you really need is you really need a broad base of people to work with. And one of the things that I don't have at this institution is I don't have an academic affiliation for the institution. I think it has to start with training, has to start with medical school, has to go through to residency, and then into an entirely different kind of practice setting. But all those pieces have to be there to kind of jump in where I'm jumping in now, when these guys are already been in practice for 15 years, and say, now we're going to change how we practice. We're going to be more transparent. We're going to be more, share our records and do all these kinds of things so that it's seamless for women. That's a new concept, and it's going to take a while. If we could start that whole concept way back when they start training and move it forward, it really does take even more than a village. It takes a lot of people in order to be able to create something like that.
When you say you should start back, do you mean medical school, residency, or even before both of them?
Well, it's interesting. I think the whole concept of what healthcare is in this country is slowly going to change. I think that listening to patients and making patients central, we do make patients central, that's what we care about. But in terms of really thinking about what do they care about, what outcomes do they care about, we haven't been quite so good at doing that. I think our society is forcing us to do that. And so therefore, as the culture changes, there'll be an entire paradigm shift, and that indeed would start before medical school. But definitely, by the time you get to medical school, I think to just look at disease, disease and cure, rather than illness, which is the patient's perception of what's going on, and healing, which can even occur without cure. We tend to think of cure as a failure, or lack of cure as a failure. Well, healing can still happen. So we have this long, long cycle of care, and we have to really look at it in a different way. And I think medical school is primary in terms of trying to do that. And definitely residency, if we learn to practice that way, if we learn to care for our patients that way, and really do see them through the cycle.
If you had the authority to change the way a training program was being developed, what would you do so that you could include this type of thinking in our standard residency training?
I think that we have to move to a different model than the traditional academic departments. Now that's probably such heresy that people will be screaming, but when we departmentalize care, we have breakdowns in communication, we have breakdowns in continuity, we have a lack of a seamless environment for the patient. The patient doesn't really care whether she's admitted to the OBGYN department, whether she's admitted to the medicine department. She wants the best doctors, she wants the best nurses, she wants the best care. And in order for us to really do that, we need to be looking, I think, at service line type approaches, which is these are the services we offer for this patient population, and they communicate. Every time a patient walks in a door, she doesn't have to fill out a huge number of papers all over again. She doesn't have to reintroduce herself. She has a group of people who are taking care of her and know her, and they either know her on paper or actually probably, hopefully, paperless electronically.
Well, Vivian, it's been wonderful to hear some of your ideas.
Thank you.
Some of your changes for the specialty. I'll give you an opportunity to make whatever comments you would like for posterity.
For posterity, actually, I'll tell you, that was one of the best things about getting to do a presidential address, is I got to make some comments for posterity. And I really poured my heart and soul into that and said what I wanted to say about how I feel about women and women's health care and what we do as physicians, and how proud I am to be part of this organization and to be an obstetrician gynecologist.
Thank you very much. It's
Thank
been
you,
a pleasure
Ralph.
to talk to you today.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.